one of the things that we've done now is projected the computer screen up on the wall so that as people come live, they can see what's happening on Zoom. You, on the other hand, don't see what's happening out there in the living area. But we'll create as unified a community as we possibly can. Hi, Alain.
Hello. So sorry. He's very friendly. He's excited.
And we have a dog.
Yeah. Welcome.
Now I won't go on.
Yeah, this is
Right. This is a program of the Center for Jewish Life Miami. The Center for Jewish Life Miami will be a many multi-millions of dollar project, physical project that will rise on the campus of Beth David congregation. And it's a couple of years away. But in that building, there will be an atrium. And the atrium already is understood as a place where all the various disciplines that are in such a center, the school, the synagogue, the gym, the play fields, the cultural activities, where everybody who participates in those will come physically together, and it will be all denominations and all generations. And we can create programs that will happen there. And Adam and I were just talking about what it would be like to have this program move into a $100 million entity that is created with studio and such. It would be extraordinary. And people can sample any particular program, and then it radiates in that center throughout all the time zones of the country, which we have pretty much represented on the screen already. So this is what we're doing. This is the intent. The virtual Center for Jewish Life here in Miami exists. It's real. How can a virtual center be real? We're going to talk about that tonight. What's real and what isn't. Last week we chose a story from this book. It wasn't. You might think it was chosen at random. It wasn't. That doesn't mean that we knew in advance which story it was going to be. We didn't. But there was a mechanism by which the story was chosen, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll do it again, which is another story. I haven't quite decided whether it should be a Hasidic story from Buber's Tales of the Hasidim or a rabbinic story from Bialik and Rudnitsky's Book of Legends. This is rabbinic fables from the Talmud and the Midrash, and this is from all the Hasidic Rebbes emanating from the Baal Shem Tov. Last week we chose this story. A profound effect. If you even if you didn't attend, but if you read the summary, perhaps you got a sense of the profound effect of this story. I'll read the story. The story is told. Every night the rabbi of Rizhin was in the habit of climbing to the attic and staying there for 2 hours. During that time, his servant, Shmulik, who accompanied him, waited, sitting on the stairs. Once, the Tzaddik's daughter wanted to fetch something from a cupboard which was in the attic and found Shmulik sitting there and weeping. She asked him what was the matter. Someone, he said, slipped me a lot of money so that I should let him go into the rabbi, and now he is inside. He opened his hand and showed her the money. Just then, the rabbi came out at the door. There was no one in the room. In Shmulik's palm lay a few shards of clay. That's a really, really difficult story. I mean, as Hasidic stories go, that one seems to be impenetrable. And yet with the 30, 40, even 50 people that we had participating, we saw right through it. We saw who the major players were. We chose by consensus to come concentrate on Shmulik, who was sitting on the stairs and weeping. We understood that the process was one of teshuvah, one of repentance, that there was a single point perhaps in our own life where we would like to go back and flip that toggle switch and make a different choice. And we realized that we weren't able to make a different choice and go back and change the course of events, but we could change our attitude concerning those events. And changing the attitude was as if we had flipped that toggle switch, and that can produce an extraordinary result. And what we did with that story was that it didn't end with what Buber had written, it deepened. It went deeper and deeper and deeper. And many of us absorbed that story personally, and when we've been working on it during the week. So even though the hour ends, the story hasn't ended. We're still digesting, absorbing that story, and it's still working within us. Here's something that came through the week. In the future, it will be told that one of the participants last week heard that story deeply and knew it had been told only for him. It was his situation almost precisely, is the way he reported it. He said, as a child, he had excelled in the arts, especially sculpture, but his parents had pushed him toward a career at which he might earn his livelihood. He became a doctor, a plastic surgeon with a large and lucrative cosmetic practice. He found himself in the middle of his life, as if he were sitting on the stairs, crying as he heard the story. He had a lot of money in his hand. He had a big home in Gables by the sea. He had a boat out back. He had kids in private schools, and he found himself crying. That's what the story had done to him. As he heard the story, it was as if the Shechinah herself came to comfort him. And as his tears settled, he reported a resolve that he would reduce his practice and open a studio. And pursue his first love and start producing sculpture again. Imagine what it meant for him that when Shmulik opened up his hand, there were shards of clay, because clay was the substance in which he formed his sculptures. What an extraordinary story. Now here's a question for you. A powerful story. Did that really happen or not? Is that story recording a conversation I had with this plastic surgeon? Or is this a story that emanated from the story that we learned last week? So it's a continuation of the story, or a recast of the story in a different way. What's more powerful than whether the story is real or not is that the story is a story. So even that story has its impact. Maybe even a greater impact than the Baal Shem Tov story, because it's cast in modern terms. And the power of a story, and here's something that is truly relevant, which is a dangerous word, is the story is more powerful than the fact. Facts are debatable. Two people looking at a fact recounted in different ways according to their prejudice, their political parties, their denomination. Here's a book from which we will not be selecting a page. This is Making History. The recent book was recently published by Richard Cohen. The storytellers who shaped the past. And he goes from Thucydides all the way up to the present, showing every historian and everybody who presented history did so from his and ultimately her point of view. And we see history through that person's eyes. And we assume that's what history is, but all you're getting is the story of events from a particular point of view. And it throws into doubt everything that you've ever learned as history. You know, consider the book 1619, you know, that came out recently that began to cast slavery and the effects of slavery on the development of the American economy. And the reaction from the right side of American politics against this. Wow. Well, slavery is a fact. How slavery is treated is a story. So the story has more powerful effect. You would say, well, the fact is truth. The fact is dilemmas. The fact is emet. Well, emet is very sharp-edged. There is no command to pursue emet. There is only a command to pursue justice. Justice, justice you shall pursue. So justice is on one side of the truth and justice is on the other side of the truth. And they approach the truth, but they approach it from different sides. And ultimately you incline after the majority. So what we're doing here is exceedingly real. What we produce is effects in the world that are more powerful than truth. Buber got into a lot of difficulty for writing this book. He is a philosopher. These stories are not philosophy. And they were saying, the philosophers were saying he was wasting his time. And I assure you he wasn't. He knew exactly what he was doing. These books resulted in I Vow, perhaps the book of philosophy, which he is best known. Now, the process of choosing a story, how is that done? Is it entirely at random? It is not entirely at random. We set a certain tone here with the people who are here in person and also the people who are in Zoom. We've done 80, 90 sessions on Zoom, many of us together. And we've learned, we formed a community on Zoom. And the effect on the learning that can take place and the personal learning and the interactions, even with no more than a word or two in chat, can be profound. In setting that environment, then we ask somebody who is in tune and is willing to risk some exposure to choose a book, a page, a story, and then we descend into that, or we continue it, it never ends. So how do we get some exposure? We did it last week, and we're going to do the same thing again. To risk yourself, that means to put something in writing, either in the chat room or on paper. If you don't have any paper, I'll suggest something. What was your last dessert? That's what we did last week. What was your last dessert? And the second question was, what is your intent to draw away from this hour that we have together? I'll show you a different way of writing and committing. Those of you, I hope nobody is watching me when I pray. I hope each of you is involved. But very often when I'm davening, when I get to the Via Hafta or such like that, if you watch Sue Gulak, she's signing Via Hafta because her ASL is pretty fluent. I'm not signing it. I'm writing it. I'm writing v'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha v'chol miodecha. In other words, by committing my body to the writing of the letters of the Hebrew words, I'm investing more of my energy into the davening. And what I want to do is surrender not only my intellectual and my emotional, but my physical self also into the process. So if you like, you can write your dessert like this, the very last dessert that you've had. Key lime pie. And by writing it, you're risking some exposure, especially if you're writing it on chat, because I don't know how many people we have at the moment.
Somebody else also had key lime. Somebody else also had key lime.
Somebody else had key lime pie, I see. His eyesight's much better than mine. And then after you write your dessert, so that we begin with sweetness, a line or two for your intent. My yoga instructor does the same thing. She says at the beginning of the session, you begin this hour of yoga practice with intent. What is your intent in the course of this practice? That's beautiful. That's simply beautiful. And in this, you contribute some energy. Now, energy and mass have an equivalence. Sometime I'll show you how Einstein developed his theory because he was part of a community in which Hasidic thought was taught. Now that can, it produces a certain environment. So now, the exposures, I'm going to choose one of you. This is hard for me to do. Choose one of you. Simply to decide whether we should work with a Hasidic story. If you can risk putting your image up there rather than just your name, that's a commitment also. That makes me feel like less that I'm talking into the darkness. Okay. It doesn't work that way. Brad, unmute yourself, please.
Being summoned to the.
Unmuted.
Great. Brad, shall we work with Sefer Agadah or with Tales of the Hasidim tonight?
I like Tales of the Hasidim.
You do. Shall we work with volume 1 or volume 2?
Let's do volume 1.
Now, both of these volumes are in the single binding. This is so new. Adam just got it.
Just for you.
Not for me.
I mean,
You
for
got
us,
this for
it's
you.
easy, right, but,
Okay. Mine is falling apart. Volume 1, a page number, please.
48.
Well, that may present a problem, but we'll find out. The difficulty is, it's like 2 pages of stories. I need a page number, it would be fine, but a page number that has a short story. So choose something deeper in the book, maybe. This is what page 38 looks like. It's simply.
Oh, no. 67.
Oh, 67. Okay, that's perfect.
Many options. That's a great page.
That's a great page.
Yeah, remember this for next time.
You know this one?
No, not. It's a lot of very short.
Oh, I see. We have the sermon, like locusts, happy is the people. We have those 3 stories. The sermon, like locusts, and happy is the people. I mean, one jumped out at me, but that's because I've been a rabbi. Any one of those jump out to you, Brad? The sermon.
Nothing. You said sermon. What was the other 2?
Like locusts, and happy is the people.
Like locusts.
Sure, why not choose the difficult one? Rabbi Michael of Slochev told. Now, he told this. Once when we were on our journey, when our teacher, Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, the light of the 7 days, it's flattering. He went into the woods to say the afternoon prayer. Suddenly, we saw him strike his head against a tree and cry aloud. Later, we asked him about it. He said, while I plunged into the Holy Spirit, I saw that in the generations which precede the coming of the Messiah, the rabbis of the Hasidim will multiply like locusts. And it will be they who delay redemption. And this is painful to read. For they will bring about the separation. Oh, you've got your book. I don't know if that's cheating or not. They will bring about the separation of hearts and groundless hatred, sinat chinam in Hebrew. I'm going to read it again. This is Rabbi Michael Slochev, one of the disciples of the Baal Shem. He was on a journey with their teacher. The Baal Shem Tov went into the woods to say the afternoon prayer. Suddenly saw the Baal Shem Tov strike his head against a tree and cry aloud. Later, when we asked him about it, he said, while I plunged into the Holy Spirit, I saw that in the generations that precede the coming of the Messiah, the rabbis of the Hasidim will multiply like locusts. And it will be they who delay redemption, for they will bring about the separation of hearts and groundless hatred. Not very flattering for the rabbis. Not very flattering for the rabbis. Stop and consider the state of the rabbinate today. We have a regressive rabbinate, we have a progressive rabbinate. The regressive rabbinate gravitates back towards the 16th century and dresses as if it were in the 16th century and lives in an environment and treats its women as if they were in the 16th century. The progressive rabbinate comes out to the world and seems to be losing ground with its constituency. The conservative seminary is closing, a reform seminary is closing. Synagogues are becoming porous. Is it possible that the Baal Shem Tov saw this? In his days, there were always two sides to everything. In his day, there were Misnagdim and Hasidim. The Misnagdim, Lithuanian rabbis, they emphasized observance of the halakha in its absolute detail. Everything fixed in its proper place. The Hasidim emphasized the kavanah, the intent with which the mitzvahs were to be performed, with all of their emotional and spiritual content. Wow. He struck his head against a tree. Would that stand out to you?
And the rabbis of the Hasidim.
Say it again.
And the line that it's the rabbis of the Hasidim, which means they're still Hasidim.
The still
And like what they represent.
Here's, I mean, it's very, these stories are of the Baal Shem Tov down to the third, fourth generation. After that, they stop. It's only occasionally after that in Hasidic literature that you have a rabbi like the Sfat Emet, perhaps, who creates a series of teachings that follow in the spirit of these rabbis from around the year 1800. The Baal Shem Tov was in the late 19th century, Nachman of Bratslav in the early 19th century. Those were the generations that generated all of these stories that I have in these two bindings. After that, you had emancipation. And you had everybody circling the wagons, emphasizing Jewish observance, lest Jews assimilate and move away from rabbinic Judaism. And the spiritual quest seemed to stop. Did the Baal Shem Tov see that? The Baal Shem Tov banged his head against a tree. Kabbalists among you that might register. The Baal Shem Tov was a master of Luriana Kabbalah. He is a master of the Zohar. He knew that diagram with all of its PowerPoints and the lines connecting all of them. The Kabbalah now, for the most part, is taught in two dimensions, whereas the names as having particular power, and the connections and the lines and the relationships between them. That's not the way I suspect Lurie intended it, but it's the way it's come down to us. Whatever the Baal Shem Tov saw, it was a sign of despair, and that there would be senseless hatred returning. Do you recall the famous story in which senseless hatred plays the primary motivating force? It's the story of the destruction of the temple. And that the temple fell not because of the Romans, because of dissension within the Jewish community and the senseless hatred between one faction of the Jewish community and another faction of the Jewish community. And the Baal Shem Tov seeing that it forecast that such senseless hatred would return and happen once again and cause great damage. Are you following the track? Can you actually read that?
Not using yet. The roots of the tree connect to all the trees. The echo of the Baal Shem Tov's head striking one tree spreads his distress messages to all trees. How do the trees react? That's the last comment.
Wow, we got a lot of participation. We need people now willing to go out into the forest and bang their head against a tree and see what they perceive. Can
we read it one more time?
Or what page was it?
67.
67.
I see a lot of light and good news in the middle of all this.
Once when we were on a journey with our teacher, Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, went into the woods to say the afternoon prayer. Suddenly he saw him strike against a tree and cry aloud. Later, we asked him about it. He said, while I plunged into the Holy Spirit, I saw that in the generations which precede the coming of the Messiah, the rabbis of the Hasidim will multiply like locusts. And it will be they who delay redemption, for they will bring about the separation of hearts and groundless hatred. Thoughts?
So many thoughts, but it's being recorded. So
It's being
I have to be mindful of what I say.
He's gonna,
Mine can be recorded.
he's a rabbi. He's got to report to higher authority. Yes. Okay. I think we're both seeing the same thing.
But there is something Rabbi mentioned.
What do you see?
I see that he says it will be they who delay redemption. So there is redemption. He
Oh,
says
yes.
that already.
There is redemption,
Because sometimes when you look now, you think,
but they will delay redemption.
they'll delay redemption.
They will be a barrier to redemption. Do you understand what redemption is? The Hebrew word for redemption is geulah. Redemption is when you put something of value into hock because you need the capital to invest. You pawn something. You take this watch. Some of you have seen me do this exercise before, and you put this watch to the pawn shop, and you say, "Well, this Rolex watch, it's been in my family for generations, and surely it's worth $40,000, and the pawn shop will give you $10,000 with 30-day terms at substantial interest rates." And they will take that from you, and you take that capital because you need it, and you invest that capital. Now, this watch is in need of redemption. The question rarely asked, but Buber would ask this question, is how does the watch feel? The watch is now separated from the wrist, and it's sitting there on the wall of the pawn shop waiting to be redeemed. And in the ultimate time, the watch is taken back and put onto the wrist of its owner, and it's redeemed. Now, it's as if the Holy One, in the process of creation, takes up its own essence and puts that essence into space and time. It's an investment. And this essence in the new paradigm is invested in us. It's invested in everything in creation. And we then work in partnership with the divine and refining that essence and returning it to the Holy One and as tikkun hanefesh, as refinement to the soul, better than we had left it behind. And when the sum total of soul is refined, then ultimate redemption takes place, and creation comes to its end. And the male and female aspects of creation, the transcendence and the immanence, are unified by Yom Hahu Adonai Echad Shmo Echad. On that day, God's name and God itself will be one. And that's Geulah, that's redemption. We use the word, but we don't talk about it much. What gets in the way of redemption is dissension. So senseless hatred gets in the way of redemption. And the Baal Shem Tov is lamenting because even in his time, he can see that coming. The question is, do we share his lament? Rabbi? Good luck.
Well, It says that the rabbis of the Hasidim will multiply like locusts, right?
Yes.
So it's not. What does that mean? What does it mean that the rabbis will multiply like locusts? Like it means that there actually isn't a cohesive voice anymore. That we're not actually. It's so many different voices. That's the problem, right? That leads to sinat chinam and hatred and like all this division and separation because there's this multiplicity of voices. It's no longer a cohesive thing. I was thinking about this in the beginning when you were opening, right? But there's the beautiful Torah. I wish I could give proper credit. Sean Zevit is where I heard it from, but that right, it's Adonai Elohechem Emet, right? And it's in the plurality.
Adonai Elohechem Emet, Adonai, your God, is truth.
But it's Elohechem, it's plural you, right? So your God is truth, and my God is truth, and it's like actually that the way in which we all are able to glimpse at the infinite is the way in which we each can, which is truth to our own selves, right? It's truth in the way in which we experience that truth, and the way in which we experience that encounter and that divine. And this story is the story that there actually is all of these different ones without recognizing that each of those voices are also reflective of that infinite.
If it says Adonai Elohechem Emet, Adonai, your God, is truth, each person now has his or her own approach to truth. It's similar to say Adonai Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. There is only a single truth. There is only a single God. But there are many approaches to that truth, and there are many approaches to God.
But the rabbis of the Hasidim is different. That's the challenge to that. It's not. It's very interesting. Does everybody get what I'm saying, kind of, right? Because the rabbis of it's not that there are so many different voices, and that's the problem. It's like the rabbis of the Hasidim will multiply like locusts, meaning even the rabbinic voice is not really in a unified expression of what it's trying to relate to anymore. It's in these individual fractal expressions of their own individuality, and it's no longer reflective of this oneness that it's trying to convey. Right, locusts, it's also why like swarming creatures are so problematic to God, because it's like oneness, but it's not really oneness, it's brokenness, and it's like purest expression of the particles of that entity. I don't know if that makes sense, but I see it very clearly in my own head.
You see hope.
I see hope if all of the locusts are singing the same song. But if they're individual brokenness pieces, all living in their own.
If senseless hatred there's an ashram in the Bahamas, the Shivananda ashram, and the swamis there are mostly Israeli. They've been there for a great many generations, not generations, a great many decades. And they have a symposium every December around Christmas time, in which they bring spiritual teachers from the various disciplines. Wally and I have been privileged to attend as representatives of Jewish tradition, and me as a teacher of Jewish tradition, along with Tibetan Buddhists, Hindu Swamis, Sikhs, Jain, Sufi, Greek Orthodox, Kirtan, Hare Krishna. It's an extraordinary event. And what there is mutual respect. There is no dissension between us. There is an understanding that each of us is pursuing truth, and each of us is coming from a different base. And as long as our eyes are on that truth, and as long as we are faithful to our base, we climb that mountain towards that truth. We have our own vocabulary. We have our own traditions, symbols, devices, techniques, for climbing towards that truth or descending towards that truth, whatever direction it is that you're moving. And we learn from each other. We learn from each other. We learn each other's vocabularies. We learn each other's practices. And it enhances our practice. There is no dissension. The Messiah will come when all of these particles, each of which will have its own individual approach to truth, orients itself in that direction. And then there's no dissension. There's only an acknowledgement that each person has his or her own path. I remember once in my naivete explaining this in a multi-faith symposium here in this country, in Miami. I was speaking at the Episcopal Cathedral downtown and using similar language and such. And speaking to a person from an Eastern tradition after the event, which was a very successful event, and my words were well received. And I said, if there were only a single word, to say, that you are approaching the truth and I am approaching the truth, and I only hope that each of us learns how to do it in respect, and each of us learns how to do it more profoundly. And she said to me, Namaste, which apparently is what Namaste means. And I said, oh yes, Namaste. I don't know the Yiddish for that, do you? No. But Namaste, we have that. And we had that experience in the cathedral, and then we've had that experience in the ashram. Now the question is, can we have that experience in our synagogues? If we can have our experience in our own community and orient those people towards that truth. Let's see if we can go back to this story and imbue it with this. Rabbi Michael Socha told, once when we were on a journey with our teacher, Rabbi Israel Basham told, the light of the 7 days. That's a way of saying that creation was made only so that the Baal Shem Tov could come into the world. It's quite an honorific. He went into the woods to say the afternoon prayer. Suddenly, we saw him strike his head against the tree and cry aloud. Later, we asked him about it. He said, while I plunged into the Holy Spirit, I saw in the generations which precede the coming of the Messiah, the rabbis of the Hasidim, that's us, will multiply like locusts, and it will be they who delay redemption. The arguments within the denominations, within the communities, between the rabbis, for they will bring about the separation of hearts and groundless hatred. An argument that is not for the sake of heaven breeds dissension. Dissension is an argument not for the sake of heaven. An argument that is for the sake of heaven refines soul and brings one towards redemption. I need to go to the story up above it, because that was the story that my eye fell to. I'll read it. The sermon. Once they asked the Baal Shem to preach after the prayer of the congregation. He began his sermon, but in the middle of it, he was shaken with a fit of trembling, such as sometimes seized him while he was praying. He broke off and said, "O Lord of the world, you know that I am not speaking to increase my own reputation." Here he stopped again, and then the words rushed from his lips. Much have I learned and much have I been able to do, and there is no one to whom I could reveal it. And he said nothing further. He broke off his sermon and said, Lord of the world, you know that I am not speaking to increase my own reputation. And he stopped again. The difficulty with that, if he said that, he was aware that he was speaking to increase his own reputation. And that stopped him.
You had a request to read it again.
Yes.
There's a request to read it again.
Once they asked the Baal Shem Tov to preach after the prayer of the congregation. He began his sermon. But in the middle of it, he was shaken with a fit of trembling, such as sometimes seized him while he was praying. He broke off and said, O Lord of the world, you know that I am not speaking to increase my own reputation. End quote. Here he stopped again. And then the words rushed from his lips. Much have I learned and much have I been able to do, and there is no one to whom I could reveal it. And he said nothing further. I'll share some personal history because this really brings it to mind. Those of you who know me from the days of the Chavra of South Florida, which was in existence for over 20 years, and which developed a Shabbat morning minyan, and which had holy days. I was the director, rabbi of the Chavra of South Florida. My name was Mitch, and I coached from the side when I was at my best. Do you recall how many sermons I ever gave? In 20 years, do you recall any of my sermons?
I don't recall you giving sermons.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Maybe I wasn't there for everything, but maybe if you gave a 1 minute, sermon, possibly that.
There was a tradition on Yom Kippur when we didn't have to go home for lunch, that in the morning service, anybody could give a sermon, but it could only last 1 minute. And people would line up and prepare. Some of them that were really good were really prepared to get a 1 minute sermon out. And I do recall on occasion taking my minute as a member of the congregation. And that was, and I did do that, I think at least one occasion. And over 20 years, those were the only sermons I ever gave. I never gave a sermon in over 20 years. For 5 years before that, I had been a pulpit rabbi at Beth Am. I see people who from Beth Am here, this is extremely astonishing, who remember me from those days. I remember you from those days. I gave sermons. In fact, I had to have a sermon topic 2 weeks in advance because we had a PR department who would send out press notices about what was playing at the synagogue on any given Friday night. And I wrote my sermons. And after 5 years, I had a large collection of sermons that I had written. And I reviewed them. And they were good. At least I thought so. And they all began with the pronoun I. This is what I did. This is the book I read. This is the movie I saw. This is what I think. And I realized that I was teaching downhill. And the better I was, the less I was serving the congregation. And so I stopped. I simply stopped. And I walked away from the congregation to rabbinate. And the Chavra developed around the table, and then 2 tables, and then 1 living room, and then 2 living rooms, and then common institutions until ultimately it became too big to manage. And I had been ill and I didn't have the energy to manage anymore. The question is, can we emulate that on Zoom? Can we have hybrid learning with people present? And people in little boxes? And empower people to look deeply and come up with their own path towards truth. No, it's in arguing with each other for the sake of heaven that you refine your path. If it's for the sake of ego, then you have dissension. If it's the sake of consolidating your own personal power, then you have dissension. If it is for the sake of heaven and refinement of your own soul and climbing towards truth from your perspective, then you have refinement of soul. And particles who are attracted together in that same direction will bring in the coming of the Messiah. Yes? You know what she looks like? No. Okay. It's so hard to read the chat here.
Yeah, it's incredibly small.
Hey, look, it's your computer.
I know when I hook, I didn't. It's normally better when it's hooked up to the projector. Everything's different.
I see. Oh, you can read it. Those who are in the room, it's up on the wall. No, you
Wait,
can't
somebody
read it.
said, I read a great comment before. Jill said something really cool. Oh, here, maybe that's what the problem is with the intent of the rabbis from the first story refers to.
The intent of the rabbis.
Of the first story.
Yes.
Like we had to read both together.
Well, it's the same teacher. So that the stories, Buber puts them into order. He knows what he's doing. And I'll read Michal Slochov again. Once we were on our journey, the Baal Shem Tov went into the woods for the afternoon prayer. Suddenly we saw him strike his head against a tree, cry aloud. Later, he was in pain. He said, when I plunged myself into the Holy Spirit, which means I surrender to Ruach Elohim, I saw that in the generations which precede the coming of the Messiah, the rabbis of the Hasidim will multiply like locusts, and it will be they who delay redemption, for they will bring about the separation of hearts and groundless hatred. It seems that the progressive Judaism is beginning to coalesce around the power of the individual, the power of the crowd, the power of lay wisdom, that rabbis are being ordained from below. The congregation select who is going to be their rabbi rather than having it dictated to them from some seminary, which is at a distance from congregational life. And the more that we can empower our members individually to have confidence in themselves, to risk exposure, the more confident they can be to express their opinion and hear the opinion of the other in such a way as to argue for the sake of heaven, to sharpen their own soul, refinement of soul. There'll be a new progressive Judaism that will emerge, and we need it soon in our day. One more story on the page. I'm going to read it.
The happy one?
Happy as the people. Yes. Do you have a book?
I'm waiting.
Concerning the verse in the Psalm, happy is the people that know the joyful shout. They walk, O Lord, in the light of thy countenance. The Baal Shem said, when the people do not, oh my goodness, it's just what we said. Oh my goodness, my goodness. When the people do not depend upon heroes, but are themselves versed in the joyful shout of battle, then they will walk in the light of your countenance. It's as if, Buber knew where I was going and then wrote this so that we would finish with that statement. Is that Jerry Feinstein? No, there was smiling. It's so nice to see you. I'll read that story again because it sums up everything that we've been pointing to. Concerning the verse in Psalms, happy is the people that know the joyful shout. They walk, O Lord, in the light of thy countenance. And the Baal Shem said, when the people do not depend upon heroes, but are themselves versed in the joyful shout of battle. That means a battle for the sake of heaven. Then they will walk in the light of your countenance. Kind of neat.
All
isn't
three
it?
really needed to be read together.
Yes, also all three of them go together.
It's a very good page.
Good call, page 67.
Hmm?
Good call, page 67.
It was,
Way to go,
it was a
Brad.
good call, Brad, page 67. They're difficult stories, but they go together and ultimately they come to this single point. We are going to definitely have 2 more sessions, and we'll keep working on the technology and hope to have a summary of the, boy, it's going to be tough writing this summary, but then last summary was tough too. Out, a recording of this will be available. I can't stand listening to the recording of myself, but other people might. And on July 4th, you want to tell us what will happen?
Sure. July 4th, if everybody's welcome, no matter where you are. If you want to make a trip out to Miami, you're welcome. But we're going to do a barbecue before class. So barbecue at 5:30, and then we'll go right into, so if you haven't been in person yet and you'd like to come in person, you're all welcome. In the email, we'll figure out how to do registration.
And he's an extraordinary cook. I mean, he's won prizes for his barbecue, quite literally. Kosher barbecue. And then we'll evaluate how these sessions went, and then we'll resume them, hopefully, or make adjustments as necessary to see how it's possible to engage people from so many different screens, from so many different time zones. And with spontaneity. You understand that if I chose the stories ahead of time, I wouldn't have the exposure, I wouldn't have the risk. But to have these stories revealed, one by one, and work towards coming to some understanding and process that continues and opens up for us, that's necessary. I have to risk the same exposure that you're risking. I leave. There was once a rabbi who was called back into service. There was a congregation in which there was great dissension. So much dissension that one side could barely talk to the other, and it was tearing the congregation apart. And if it continued much longer, there was no way this congregation would exist. They had dismissed their rabbi by a single vote. So many were for that rabbi, one more was against that rabbi. And because of that single vote, that rabbi had to uproot his family and leave town. And that made the dissension even greater. And so the placement committee looked around, and it was suggested that a rabbi with a spiritual intent might be able to come in and resolve the difficulty. So they invited the rabbi for an interview. And they said, Rabbi, how will you heal this congregation? And the rabbi said, I have no intention whatsoever of healing this congregation. It is certainly not in my ability or capability to heal this congregation. And they said, but we're here for you to resolve the dissension. Oh, to resolve the dissension, we can do that. But to heal the rift, no, we can't, I can't do that. And he says, well, what do you mean? I said, imagine you have a cut on your hand. Well, how do you heal that cut? He said, you can stitch the edges together, but you don't heal it. Somehow the edges know to come together because that is the way in which flesh is programmed to come together, and it is healed by an agency outside of itself. Certainly not anything you do or the physician does. And so what will you do? And I said, we'll come in and we'll orient the congregation towards truth. If we can get everyone pointed in the same direction, no matter where they stand, they'll be pointed towards truth. So what is truth? Truth is earnest Torah for the sake of gaining knowledge of your relationship with the divine and intensifying it, and sincere prayer, standing in service of the divine. And if everybody is standing in those directions, then everybody is pointing in the same direction. And once you're pointing in the same direction, you can hear the voices that are coming from the other side and voices that are coming from the other side. And you have a common goal, and dissension will diminish. And when it diminishes enough, then that rabbi said, I go elsewhere, and you can go back and hire somebody else to carry it forward. And that's what the rabbi did. And that's what happened. And with that, we bring this session to an end. You like that story, Charlie?
I like the cookie story better.
Which one?
The cookie story. Where the man was trying not to eat all the cookies on his plate.
Charlie is here, Rabbi and Jesse's son and daughter.
We would love to hear what Charlie said. We didn't, at least I would, Sophie and I would.
There's another story that she likes better. I think it's in Curse of Blessings, perhaps. I don't know. I'll look it up and get back to you.
Okay. This is an extraordinary book if you really want a long and difficult book. But he punches holes in everything. Everything that you thought was ever a fact isn't. Everything is portrayed from the point of view of the historian. So it isn't making history, it's telling his story about the way in which you think things were. And the story becomes more important than the fact, as we see right now in our own society. And these stories shape our tradition. We don't know what the facts are, but the stories are real. And
The story is the expression of the individual's experience.
the story is the expression of the individual's experience, biases, prejudices, and failings, all of those things. You bring it all with you. And then you sharpen it against somebody else's, and you polish it against somebody else's. And that becomes a great delight. We don't intend to do any more, do we? No, we're done.
Right now, your time?
Yeah, I mean, it's over now.
Yeah, be respectful of people's time.
If anybody's recording, they can stop recording. Jasmine, if
Oh
you're
yeah,
there.
it'll happen once I click out of this.
I don't want to click on it. I want to see people.
We can
Thank you, rabbis.
Thank you so much.
Wait a
Pleasure.
second. Hi, Sophie.
Is Sophie there?
Hi, Sophie.
Yeah, we've been here the whole time.
Hi, Sophie.
Sophie.
Hi, Sophie.
Charlie, say hi, Sophie. Charlie said hi, Sophie. You want to?
Yeah, and so did Brad.
So did Ellen.
And Mike is waving. Hi, Ellen.
Hi, I'm using
Thank you
someone's
for all the
computer.
hellos.
Yishkoch Rabbanim.
Sophie's and I are very touched by this community and your warmth to Sophie.
Have a good week, everyone.
Yeah.
Shkoch.
Mike signed, I love you. I love you.
Bye.
Have a
Thank
good
you,
summer.
Nick.
It starts tomorrow.
Thank you, Adam. Oh, geez, you're right.
Yes.
Good to see everybody. Have a good week. I want to say Shabbat Shalom, like we used to. But it's on Thursdays, when class was on Thursday.
It's Shabbos until Tuesday, if you like. That's the way it works for my kids. If I don't see them Friday and I see them, by Tuesday, they still get a blessing.
Beautiful. All right.
It's good to see you. You're front and center of my screen.
Thank you and have a good week. Good summer. Look forward to the
Lynn.
next one. Hi, Ivy.
Hi. Yeah, stay cool, y'all. It's like in the hundreds in Texas.
Isn't it always?
No.
It's worse.
It's worse.
The heat started earlier and it's more intense.
Do you know the only major city in the United States that's never recorded a 100-degree day? Good.
Anchorage, Alaska?
It's Miami.
I thought that's what you were going to say, but as you might know that, but that's amazing. But I think 90 or 95 with your humidity is at least equivalent to 100 and something here.
It's Miami. It's never recorded a 100-degree day.
Even
It just feels like it.
got a lot of humidity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Wally. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Ciao, what up?
Night. And thanks for reading the happy story.
It was a good way to end. I mean, the whole page came together.
Great.
Waiting for that. All right. Good night, everybody, and have a good week. And we'll see you again soon. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Okay.
Jonathan Nelson.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.